welcome back to my channel. I am still working on my lighting and sound situation, so I appreciate you bearing with me. If you have any recommendations on like a good microphone, or I'm probably still just gonna keep using my iPhone for the time being, but any sort of microphone that works well with an iPhone, I would love a recommendation. So today I want to talk about 5 Stephen King books that I think are underrated, and then 3 that I think are overrated. Now I'm a pretty big Stephen King fan. I have read probably around 30 of his books, and like I said, big fan, but I know some people that are fans of his can be very territorial and very gatekeepy about his stuff. That's not me. I just read what I like to read. But I do have some fairly different opinions than the majority, and so I figured why not share them. Now, I just want to preface this by saying these are not necessarily my favorite Stephen King books, and the ones that I'm gonna say are overrated are not necessarily books that I dislike. I just think they're not as good as everyone says they are. So with that, let's get into it. So the first book I would like to talk about that I think is underrated is Finders Keepers. This is the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes trilogy, whichever you want to call it. And while I wouldn't recommend reading it as a standalone, you definitely could. It's just you'd be spoiled for the first book. So this is about a guy who is bad. He's like a criminal, and he goes to his favorite author's house, kills him, steals all his money and an unpublished manuscript featuring his favorite character. He knows he's about to get arrested for a completely different crime, so he buries it by this tree. He goes to prison, and then like 20 years later, this kid finds it buried, and then the criminal gets out of prison. And he goes back and tries to find his stuff, and it's not there, and yeah. But it is so good. It's really interesting. I love reading books about books about authors, and while that's not like completely about an author, it's really good. And we have, if you've read the Mr. Mercedes book, you'll know like Bill, Holly, Jerome, like there's just a really cool cast of characters, and yeah, I just love this one. The next book that I think is underrated is Christine. Now, I know you're probably like, Laura, everybody knows that book, that movie. It's not underrated. It totally is. I have told so many people that this is like one of my favorite Stephen King books, and they get on me like, isn't that about like a possessed car? And I'm like, yes, and your point. But it is so good. That's truly is what it's about, but it is just like, the story is so well written. It's so scary. I think that inanimate objects like having a mind of their own is like low-key kind of scary. So I loved it. I guess it's not everyone's cup of tea, but like, if you look at this and you're just like, well, it's just about a car, read it anyways. And this came out in 1983, and of course it's got a movie, and it's so good. It's a classic for a reason, and enough people don't give it a chance. The next book that I think is underrated is Dr. Sleep. This came out in 2013, and of course it has a movie, so again, I don't want you to come at me like, that's not underrated. It is. A lot of people hated it. I thought it was fantastic. Our main character is Danny Torrance from The Shining, so while it is a sequel, you could read it as a standalone. You would definitely be missing some of the good stuff, but it is about Danny Torrance, all grown up. He goes by Dan now. He's a recovering alcoholic, and basically he still has the Shining, and he gets the shine with this group called the True Knot, and they like feed on children. Essentially, they like kill them, and they get this steam, and that's how they like live, and they live like forever. And so he starts communicating with this little girl, and then he knows that they're coming for her, and yeah, it's just fantastic. And like I said, it's just so underrated. A lot of people don't give it a chance. I don't know why, but definitely recommend it. It's so good. The next book that I think is underrated is Later. Now this one came out in 2021, so it's one of his newer releases. I read it in a day. It's really like the essence of King in a much shorter form than a lot of his books. I know some people didn't like it, but I guess I could say that about all of these, and I probably have. It's really good if you're just starting out reading Stephen King. This is a really good example of how he writes, the way he writes horror. That's, I think, pretty unique, and it's short. So if you don't like it, you can still finish it and you didn't waste that much of your time. But this is about a kid who can see dead people, and someone finds out about that on the police force, and he ends up helping solve crimes. He's a kid though, so not ideal. But I thought it was great. Yeah, the ending, if you've read it, you know. The ending was a little weird, but that's in true Stephen King fashion. The last book that I think is underrated is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. So this one came out in 1999, and it follows a little girl who is on a hike with her family. Her mother and her brother have been fighting a lot. So she kind of gets lost wandering on her own, and then she gets really lost. And the only thing she has with her is her Walkman, and she tunes into the Boston Red Sox games. And if you don't know who Tom Gordon is, he was a professional baseball player for the Red Sox. And so she starts to like look forward to that as like every day she just listens to the broadcast. And then she starts to like envision that Tom Gordon is there with her and like protecting her in the woods and monsters and yada yada. But it is so good. Again, really short. And I just think it's underrated. A lot of people haven't read it. A lot of people haven't even heard of it. It's, it's more simplistic than I think some of his other like horror novels that are really, really popular. But really, it's a great quick read. And I always think it's interesting when he writes from a child's perspective. So definitely check that one out. Okay, so here we go now with the books that I think are overrated. So first of all, we're gonna say It. Don't Come For Me. I just think this book is boring. It came out in 1986, and I was just bored for most of it. I mean, I don't think it's awful. I've definitely read worse books, but it is like huge. And when I think about how much time I spent reading this compared with how much I enjoyed it, it doesn't work. I don't think I really have to explain the plot of it, but it's about this horror in Derry, Maine, and these kids who basically had this happen to them. I mean, most people think of the villain being Pennywise the clown, which he is, but he also just takes a lot of other forms, basically like whatever you fear the most. And then I can't remember how many years later it is, but it's like around 30, I think, years later. The kids are all grown up, and then one of the people that was like in their little gang dies, so they all go back to reunite and like finish fighting off the monster. I said I didn't want to give you a synopsis, but here we are. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's just not my fave. Another one, overrated, excuse me, is Cujo. Now, and again, this is a movie. It's like a lot of people, I feel like, use Cujo for like a term for just like mean dog. But I just kept waiting for something to happen. And at least this one isn't as long as it, but like it is long enough and so little happens that I just couldn't get through it. I mean, I did finish it, but I just thought it was so boring. I mean, you do feel bad for the dog, of course, but like, oh gosh. If you don't know what it's about a dog that gets rabies and attacks. That's about it. Nothing happens. I didn't enjoy it. And the last book that I think is overrated is actually a novella. And I actually don't have it with me right now. I lent it to someone, but that is The Body. And it was what the movie Stand By Me was based on. Now, it is in a short story collection called Different Seasons, which is actually like my favorite short story collection because it has two of my absolute favorites of his short stories, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption and Apt Pupil. So still read different seasons, but I mean, The Body, you could probably do without it. There is another story in there, I think it's called The Breathing Method, which I enjoyed, but the first two, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption and Apt Pupil, beautiful. You have to read them. So that about sums it up. I would love to know which Stephen King books you love, which ones you hate, if you agree with me that some of these are good but overrated, or if you think yes, underrated for sure. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And other than that, nothing else to say. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.